This is episode 19 of the Progression Health podcast. I'm here with researcher Jaime Tartar. Jaime, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's exciting. I'm Jaime Tartar. I'm a professor of neuroscience at Nova Southeastern University. I'm also the president and co-founder of the Society for Neurosports, which is a nonprofit organization where we aim to kind of put together exercise science and neuroscience into a new academic field.
Yeah, fascinating. I was just looking more into your background, and it just reminded me. So for my research project in my postgrad, I looked at executive functioning, and let me try and remember. So it's inhibition.
Work on your executive function.
Exactly. You gotta stay on top of it. Inhibition, task switching, and then working memory. Is that the three core?
Yeah. It's sort of like the CEO of the brain working through the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to think if you look at your thoughts or just how you view things through that lens, like how much you can change things or how much they're affected. For example, you're trying to do like a task at work, but you keep switching task. Well, inevitably that's going to be harder because your task switching too much, for example.
Right. And I think a lot of people think that they're better at that than they are. We do lots of those, similar types of measurements in our lab, looking at executive functions, attention, task switching, processing speed. And we have a hard time recognizing that as far as your brain is concerned, your ability to pay attention is the most expensive thing your brain can do in any given time. And we think that we're really good at slicing up that sort of attentional pie, that we can have this going on in the background, our spreadsheet open, like randomly checking our email. But at the same time, we're really bad at judging our own cognitive state at any moment in time. So oftentimes we see these sort of cognitive failures and attentional failures really just as a byproduct of the fact that we have so many things grabbing our attentional spotlight. And it really is only meant to shine on one thing at one time. Attention's expensive and your brain's not going to give it up very easily.
Yeah, so single tasking is underrated, I think.
Yeah. Well, we all think we're good at multitasking, but the research proves that not to be true for very many people.
Yeah, for sure. So your research project, you've done a lot, and you did some in your time at Harvard in the sleep school. Is that right? Would you talk just a little bit about that and the importance of sleep and things you learned?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I still do sleep research. I just do it on bipedal organisms now, humans. Whereas at Harvard and took my Ph.D., I worked pretty much solely in rodents, primarily rats, which was really rewarding. Most neuroscientists, so I'm a weird neuroscientist in that I work with humans. Most neuroscientists work with non-human animals because of the fact that we need to look at brains. We can't take the brains out of humans. We get arrested and go to jail if we try to do that. So I know it's frustrating. And a lot of my exercise science friends, they don't love animal research, but I don't think they appreciate the fact that for this field, you have to. There's really no other way. You can't do a brain biopsy like you can like a little muscle punch. So it's really easy to study the neural underpinnings of, for example, sleep and stress and these things that I used to study by, we would physically go in there and record from individual neurons after we kept them awake all night. So some of that work, we show that even if you fragment their sleep, so this is something that would emulate obstructive sleep apnea or people who wake up a lot at night. So we were sort of forcing the rats to wake up, and then we had sort of a control condition for the movement. And what we found was that they had really poor memory the next day on these tasks of sort of spatial navigation. And when I actually looked at their brain, the mechanism that allows them to form memories, this is something called long-term potentiation, that was pretty much abolished. They just didn't have the ability to form a memory at the level of the synapse. And that was just after one night of fragmented sleep. And certainly that recovers with makeup sleep, but it was pretty alarming to us that just one night of poor sleep could impair memory like that.
Really interesting. So if somebody like myself, I'm struggling with my sleep in that I know it could be better. So an extra motivation to sleep better would be that your long-term memory will be strengthened, and you'll have like a greater reserve of memories to pull from in your day-to-day life. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think pretty much anything that's wrong with you, sleeping well is going to either make it a little bit better or a little bit worse if you're not sleeping well. So sleep is really the time when memories are consolidated. So all of those things that you're learning during the day, they get consolidated during sleep. So it's critical for all kinds of memory, motor memory, declarative memory. So we absolutely need to sleep to have a healthy memory.
So this is a health podcast, and I try to cover pretty much any area of health. So what area of health, is there any area of health that isn't touched by our sleep, that, good or bad sleep, you're okay? Or is it literally every area of your health?
As one of my colleagues likes to say, sleep is the Swiss Army knife of health. And I think that's perfect. I mean, there's pretty much no area of health that isn't restored by sleep, especially, neural processes, sleep, your brain shuts down, and it shuts down going as slow as, 1 hertz, 1 to 4 hertz in the deepest stages of sleep. And that's for a reason, right? Your brain is extremely metabolically expensive. It's using about 20% of the energy that's used in your body, even though it only weighs about 3%. So all day, all this metabolic activity is going on, and you just have no way of cleaning out that, for example, all that metabolic waste that builds up, right? It's building up all day long. Your brain doesn't have a lymphatic system to drain it out. So it's really during sleep, especially those deep, deep stages of sleep, that's when the brain actually has an opportunity to clean itself, and it'll exchange the interstitial fluid with the cerebrospinal fluid and kind of get rid of some of those toxic waste products and toxic proteins that have been building up, which is, why we see that relationship, with a lifetime of poor sleep and neurodegenerative diseases, very clear relationship. So everything, growth hormone is released during sleep. Testosterone is released during sleep. So if you want to have gains, you got to sleep. Your hormone systems, your hypothalamus controls the pituitary release of hormones. That's really entrained by the internal clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So once you have circadian misalignment, you have a misalignment of these major hormone systems. So it really is absolutely critical to health.
You had me at gains. When you talked about the testosterone and the gains, I was sold. And,
when you look at some of those charts, the longer you sleep, you get, because testosterone release is sort of time to REM sleep cycle. So you get an advantage for sleeping 8 hours versus like 4 hours.
Yeah. And you recover when you sleep, but you've given all the details there, like, just clearing out the waste products. Like, so much stuff happens when you sleep. It's absolutely essential.
Yeah. I mean, we think of it as kind of a waste of time, but spend a third of your life doing it. And if it wasn't important, that would be like the biggest mistake evolution ever made, to spend a third of your life doing something ridiculous.
Yeah, I love when I get reminded of that fact that we spend a third of our life sleeping, and it's like, human nature, evolution, or whatever you want to call it, is like in place for a reason. It's very powerful, and that's how important sleep is. That it takes up that much time. It should be probably our number one priority when it comes to health. Was that fair to say?
I mean, I'm super biased. I'm in the business of like selling sleep. I don't work. I'm not a shill for big sleep, but I think it's one of the easiest things people can do to improve their health and performance. You can increase your protein intake. You can have a great diet, and most people who want to be healthy are doing that anyway. But I think there's really not a clear understanding of just how much sleep does for overall health and wellness.
Yeah. So is there any kind of, like, I guess, simple kind of like tips you have for how people can improve their sleep, or any kind of habits you notice among people who sleep well across the lifespan?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it is just, we don't want to go to sleep at night, especially if you're young. When I was young, I was in the Army, and I thought it was really cool to stay up really late. Everybody did. When I was in college, it was the same thing. Everybody wants to stay up really late. And when you're young, it's easier for you to do that, right? It's much easier for young people in their 20s and sometimes in their 30s to stay awake than older adults. So a lot of it is what we talk about is chronic sleep restriction, that we're purposefully staying up late at night to increase the number of hours that we have to do the activities that we want to do, like watch TV and study and read and be on our phone. So a lot of it is just habit, that habit of not understanding and appreciating sleep as basic hygiene, right? So one of the things that we would want to do is, first of all, just change that mindset and think of sleep as a basic hygiene, the same way we think about going to the gym. Like, we're willing to spend an extra hour going to the gym, and we should be able to also spend that time sleeping. It's always surprising because, and everybody does this, because we don't understand how important it is for our health, we kind of like brag about having like really crappy sleep. So you probably know people that like, oh, I'm sick, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm only sleeping 6 hours a night. I'm getting work done, getting things done. I'm starting my new business, only sleeping 5 hours a night. And they kind of wear that as a badge of honor and brag about how little they sleep as a way of informing the other person that they're, super, super amazing at work. So I think we need to stop doing that, first of all. Stop thinking about sleep deprivation and sleep restriction as that kind of badge of honor.
Yeah, it'd be frightening to see the quality of work, kind of pre-sleep restriction to like post-sleep restriction. And I think it'd be interesting to define sleep restriction. So like, I guess, what would you define undersleeping as? Like, what would be the kind of the threshold to cross?
Sure. So most people need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So we can round that to 8. But we also want to keep in mind that there's individual differences. Some people biologically can get by fewer hours of sleep. They're just really rare. It's like the person who's 6'5". They exist, but you don't see them very often. So I think for most people, assume 8. And, so most people do need 8 hours. And when we do these studies, these sleep restriction studies, we can't really control how long somebody sleeps, but we control how long they're in bed. So you'll look at time in bed studies, time in bed of 4 hours, time in bed of 6 hours, time in bed of 8 hours. And when people are given that 6-hour sleep opportunity, you really see pretty significant changes. And most of those changes have to do with attention, right? Lapses in attention, because again, it's usually like kind of the first thing to go. So those attentional lapses and changes in cognition happen with 6 hours in bed. So you really want to start, trying to get up closer to that 7 hours. And so someone who's sleep restricted, they might sleep 5 hours on Monday, 4 hours on Tuesday, 7 on Wednesday, 6 on Thursday, up till 2 a.m. on Friday, but then they've incurred a sleep debt all week. And just like any debt, it has to be paid off. So usually what we do is we'll just oversleep on the weekends. So then on the weekend, they might sleep until like 10 or 11 a.m. and then start the process again, during the week. And that's pretty typical chronic sleep restriction that a lot of people experience.
And is that effective? Like, can you make up sleep debt over, we'll say, 1 or 2 nights in that kind of fashion?
When you sleep in, when you pay off your sleep debt, you'll recover those cognitive detriments that you've been building up. So once you pay off your sleep debt, your attention will be better. Everything will be sort of cognitively back online. Emotionally, because you also get sort of a lot of emotion changes with sleep loss. But you can't go back and you can never recover the metabolic deprivation. So those were the hours that you weren't cleaning your brain while you were asleep. So you can't recover that. That's over. But you can recover some of those neurobehavioral functions, so emotion and cognitive processing.
Okay, because those will be physical as opposed to emotional, right?
Well, you'll be fine emotionally. So with sleep loss, if we keep somebody up all night or we give them chronic sleep restriction, they'll have some cognitive errors, but they'll also have some emotional impairments as well. So what we show in our lab is that, and other people have shown, it's really emotional instability with sleep loss. So once they sleep in, those things will be recovered, the neurobehavioral functions, but the metabolic consequences can't really be recovered because they can't go back and have cleaned out their brain for those 2 or 3 hours. During the week, so that those metabolic waste products will have built up, and it's really a lifetime of that starts to get us into trouble.
Got it. Yeah. So the window for metabolic processes is shorter than for emotional.
Yeah. Well, you can never recover it.
Okay.
Because you've missed that time. However, we don't want to scare anybody. Like certainly all of us have crappy sleep. I have horrible sleep from time to time. We aim to get 8 hours of sleep a night, and you don't have to, right? We really want to think about this idea that small changes improving your sleep will have sort of parallel changes in health. So if you're sleeping 6 hours and you can push that up to 6.5, that's great, right? You're not failing. If you can, go from having 4 hours of time in bed to 6, like any increment we can make towards better sleep is good, right? Because it's not like you have to hit 8 hours to get all of these benefits. Small changes in sleep relate to small changes in behavior and performance.
Brilliant. Yeah. So let's say, like the example you gave yourself when you were younger and you didn't sleep as much. Let's just say you didn't sleep well up to the age of 30, for example. I'm 29. So, and then after that, can you get benefits I guess, and is it never too late to improve your sleep? Is kind of, I guess, what I'm asking. Is that possible?
It's never too late to improve your sleep. You can always, well, young brains are just good. Like your young brains are young brains, so they're always going to be healthier. It's, especially as we age, we definitely want to be more aware of sleeping and health. This is when your attention starts to plummet anyway. When you get a little bit older, like my working memory. I'm in my 40s now, and sometimes I walk in a room, I have no idea what I'm doing in there. Like those moments happen a little bit more often. And I think that the larger answer to your question is we don't really know, because those longitudinal studies just don't exist. What we do, because we've only known about the brain cleaning system for about 6 or 7 years. Like, this is kind of new information. This is what's called the glymphatic system. The paper that showed that it's specifically clearing out beta amyloid, the protein involved in Alzheimer's. I think that paper is like maybe 5 years old. So that's just kind of new information. What we know is that a lifetime of poor sleep is associated with all kinds of deleterious health outcomes. So that the sooner you can get better quality sleep, certainly the better it is.
Very interesting. And is there any specific health conditions that people should be aware of that they can avoid by sleeping more? Like this, definitely the risk is very strongly connected to this health outcome over the lifespan. I'm assuming there's a lot, but is there any really like ones that stand out,
Yeah, I think like neurodegenerative diseases are associated with a lifetime of poor sleep, and not necessarily sleep in particular, but we do see like shift workers have increased incidence of cancers. There was a nurses' health study that showed a lot of nurses that work shift work were having increased incidence of breast cancer. The idea there is it may not necessarily be related to their sleep as much as it's related to light at night. So being careful about light exposure when you should be asleep. And this idea of light at night potentially being a carcinogen to us. So I think we would want to be aware of that. And if you are already trying to sleep at night, like I do, we want to be careful about, especially the short wavelength light. So sometimes we see that as blue light, because there are little cells in your eyes, in your retina, and their only job is to respond to light, specifically short wavelength light. So these little cells communicate directly to the clock in your brain, and then that communicates directly to the pineal gland. So basically, these little cells in your eye detect light, and they say, "Oh, there's no light. Release melatonin," or "Oh, there's light. don't release melatonin." And that's like all they do all day long. So when you have light on at night, you have melatonin suppression. And melatonin is an antioxidant, it's an anti-inflammatory. So there are some downstream consequences to having chronic suppression of melatonin at night.
Yeah, the supplement that's quite popular nowadays. So let's say you're like, oh, it's 10:30. I've been, on the screens all day or whatever, and up till 10 o'clock, the light's been on in the house. I'm just going to take this melatonin at 10:30. Does that work the same way? Or does light need to interact differently with your eyes?
I mean, you can take melatonin. There's a lot of individual differences in how people respond to it. Melatonin is great, especially if you need to reset your circadian rhythm. So like my circadian rhythm, I naturally want to go to bed at midnight, but I have like high school kids and that doesn't work with their schedule. So for example, I'll take melatonin at 8 p.m. to kind of shift my schedule a little bit closer to like the Atlantic Ocean because I'm in Florida. So I kind of want to sleep as if I was living in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. Melatonin does a good job of helping to reset your circadian rhythm, especially if you can take it, I have to take it like every day at like 8 p.m. And after a few days, I'll start to get tired earlier in the night. It's great when you're traveling, especially if you're going from west to east. You want to go to bed a little bit earlier, sometimes a lot earlier. And that's where melatonin can come in handy. That's what we say, like east to west is best for sleep. If you can travel east to west, you always do a little bit better with sleep. West to east is the least. You don't want to go that direction. But if you do, that's where melatonin can come in handy. The ability of melatonin to put you directly to sleep, there's a lot of individual differences, and a lot of individual differences in the specific dose that works, slow release versus fast release. A lot of times people take pretty high doses, like 10 milligrams of melatonin, and then they find that can trigger these like really vivid, bizarre dreams, or even a little bit of sleep inertia the next day. So, with melatonin, certainly it can't hurt you, but it's something that you would want to start with a very, very low dose and see how it works for you over time.
Great. So I can't remember what exactly the side effect was that I heard. I think it was in mice as well, where it's like it suppresses something. There's some side effect to melatonin. Maybe something like testosterone, which suppresses testosterone or something along those lines. But I guess for chronic use of melatonin and like at high doses, because I know I've seen tablets that are like 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, and I know like the recommended dose is somewhere around like like half a milligram or something along those lines. So if you were taking too much for too often, would there be any potential side effects?
I mean, there's no papers that I can think of that show long-term detrimental consequences. There's some studies, bizarrely, that show like really high doses of melatonin seem to help with neurodegenerative diseases for reasons I don't think anybody completely understands. But I think melatonin's one of those things that if you take it and it helps you and it works for you and you're sleeping better, that's great. But just recognize that not everybody responds to it. But certainly, you're right, is you really want to be careful about those high doses. And we're doing a study right now trying to use like a melatonin spray to put people back to sleep. And we're using a really, really low dose, like 0.5 milligrams. So I think everybody's different. That's why these kind of one size fit all approaches, sometimes like on Instagram or on social media, it's like, oh, do this thing. It's great for everybody, but it's never great for everybody. We're all a little bit different, and we all have different neurochemistry and idiosyncrasies that make us the amazing people we are. And so that's the same thing applies when it comes to supplements. Everyone's going to respond a little bit differently.
Yeah, I feel as though it's important to know your own strengths and weaknesses, as in, you need to go to sleep at 8, but your body likes to go to sleep at 12. So you're accounting for that. And
if I take a melatonin at 8, I'll go to sleep at 10. So I'm just trying to get know thyself.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Always you compared to you.
So then outside of your work on sleep, you do some research on stress and human performance. Could you speak a little bit about the other work you do as well?
Sure. And then with sleep too, I do want to say the other thing you can do just for sleep hygiene is
Sure.
One of the other things we didn't mention is lowering your temperature at night too. Like if you lower your core body temperature, that can also help you go to sleep. There's all kinds of sleep tips, but you can read them online too. So we do a lot of work with stress. I actually started out studying stress during my PhD. I did a lot of work on the neurobiology of stress, but that sort of naturally became doing a postdoc in sleep because sleep and stress are really closely related to each other. A lot of people have insomnia, but a lot of people have insomnia because they're stressed and they have a lot of anxiety. So, for many of us that, laying down at night and everything's quiet, it's the first time that we have that opportunity to kind of be alone with our thoughts. And that's where we start to ruminate on things and not sleep. So they're really closely related to each other. But for humans, it's super interesting because unlike other animals, and this is why it gets frustrating to study stress in non-human animals, because as humans, we have this incredible ability to ruminate on things that other animals just don't do. So most of the stress that we experience, oddly, is internally driven. We don't live in a world where we're getting chased down by lions and we have our conspecifics trying to fight us. Like you probably don't have, I don't know if you can remember the last time you had to hunt down a meal or you were worried about where you were going to get water, or you were having to beat somebody up to mate for mating opportunities. That stuff doesn't really exist. And yet we still succumb to all kinds of stress-related diseases and health consequences. So for humans, most of the stress we experience isn't physical stress, it's psychological stress. And that's really ruminating and worrying about these daily life hassles that we all experience. Unlike physical stress, we have two different stress response systems, really, that sort of classic fight or flight response, where you're going to release a lot of epinephrine. But then we also have sort of that slower response system that runs through the HPA axis. And the end product is cortisol, right? Also released from the adrenal glands. But cortisol, it turns out, is a little bit more sensitive to psychological stress. So if we're thinking, I'm so stressed to my boss, they want me to do this project and I can't do it, and I have these bills to pay, and I don't know what I'm going to do about, my neighbor who's harassing me, all these things that we're ruminating on all the time. And those thoughts alone are processed through an area of your brain called the BDNF, bed nucleus of the stria terminalis. So the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, his job is basically to feed in to that stress center, into the hypothalamus, and say, oh, there's a problem, there's a threat, release cortisol. But really the threat is just us ruminating on our problems.
So it's a perceived threat could actually have as big a reaction physiologically as, maybe getting punched in the face, or like, your neighbor shouting at you. You could think yourself into a stressful state.
We are the thing that we are the most sensitive to is social evaluation, perceived social evaluation. And that's because I've put people on a treadmill and I've made them run a time to exhaustion task, which you've probably seen or read about. So you put people on a treadmill and you basically run them until they're going to fall off, right?
Fun times.
Fun times, yeah. And we've had them run for 30 minutes at 85% max heart rate. We've had them stick their hands. These are all like, hands in a bucket of ice, which is called the cold pressor test. And contrary to what a lot of people think, I'm in the business of stressing people, and cortisol is actually hard to move. And it's good, right? Because you don't want to just like start flapping your hands and some of your cortisol levels go up really high. So with these studies, we do see an increase in adrenaline because there's like a lot of physical activity, but cortisol it didn't go up at all with these studies. Except the highest I've gotten cortisol in a lab is when I bring people into a lab and I do something called the triad social stress test. So this is where they come into the lab. We have a panel of judges who are not friendly, and the person stands there and they have to give a 5-minute interview where they're being evaluated. And then after that 5 minutes, they have to do subtraction out loud. So like basic math, I will say like take the number 1749 and subtract 12 from that, and then 12 from that number, and then 12 from that number. And then when they make a mistake, the panel is kind of not friendly in correcting them. So this is 10 minutes in a room being socially evaluated. And their cortisol levels were super high. So it was so stressful for me. I'll never do it again because I hated putting people in that situation. But it was the highest I've ever seen cortisol levels in my hands in a lab situation. And really, they were just standing there talking.
Wow, that's like kind of a simple, physically you're not really doing much. It's a little bit of a mental kind of thinking. So it sort of feels like the solution to that is just not go outside, not be evaluated.
Well, not really, because on the other end of that, we know that like loneliness is horrible for your health too. It's actually like just as bad as smoking. Like it's just as bad as obesity. Like loneliness is also a killer. It's just what one of my colleagues talks about is it's an evolutionary mismatch. It's just that our brains are 200,000 years old, and there was sort of a great leap forward about 40,000 years ago, but where we sort of acquired language. But for the large, like this, imagine you have a 30,000-year-old brain. Like this is the world it's adapted for. It's lived its entire life, its entire existence has been for hunter-gatherer populations, and then you take it from this group of about 150 people. Everybody knows everybody. Everything's predictable. We're here today because we were able to rely on other humans, right? So we rely on these close relationships. We've survived ice ages because of these really close relationships. But now you drop that brain into a modern society where it has thousands of friends on social media, hundreds of people that you work with, hundreds of people at your school, and your brain can't handle this. It's not evolved for this. It's not ready to deal with it. And so social pressure, social stress is really where we fall apart.
Sounds overwhelming for the brain that we have, but in terms of stress management, I feel as though your self-talk would be the obvious starting point. So if you're getting evaluated in a situation or you're especially stressed, would your inner dialogue be a kind of a route to managing stress more effectively, or is there other ways to manage stress more effectively?
Yeah, there's lots of, and that's the good news, right? The good news is you don't have to hunt down your lunch. So that's awesome, right? You are feeling stressed by the thoughts in your head. And we could talk about managing those thoughts. And when you say learn how to manage your thoughts, it sounds like super easy, but it's really hard because the other problem with our stupid brains is that there's also what's called a negativity bias. So your brain is literally hardwired to think negative thoughts, and it gets rewarded by thinking negative thoughts. So if I showed you 100 images really quickly, you'd see the negative one more quickly than you would the positive ones. So we tend to remember negative events over positive events. We tend to ruminate on it. And when you think again, like evolutionarily, this makes sense. Like we should have been sensitive to negative events. If you were walking down a pathway and there was a bush moving around and you thought, oh, I bet that's going to be like a beautiful bunny and he's going to come out and I'm going to have this extraordinary experience. And it was like a tiger, you died, right? But if you thought, oh, something horrible is about to happen, and it happened, you were more likely to pass on those, oh, something horrible is about to happen genes, right? So we kind of select for being negative. And so just being aware sometimes that your brain is hardwired to think negative thoughts is a little bit helpful, because knowledge is power. But there's lots of really great ways of combating rumination, and again, recognizing that the same thing isn't not going to work for everybody, because we're all unique and amazing. But things like that are demonstrated to work, right? Everyone talks about mindfulness. Actually, our keynote speaker at Neurosports is one of the leaders in the field of mindfulness. So she's going to talk a lot about her work using mindfulness, especially with combat athletes. If you can meditate, certainly meditation has been shown to be an amazing way of sort of quieting your brain and combating stress. In particular, the more that you can meditate, but use sort of compassionate meditation. So thinking compassionately about.
That's what I was going to touch on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, because again, your brain doesn't want to do this. Your brain wants to think like all those negative thoughts. So sort of forcing yourself to appreciate and take those moments to appreciate what you love about your friends, what you love about your family. And over time, we actually see sort of changes in the brain. We're at a resting state. The areas of the brain that we associate with happiness, like the insular cortex, the ACC, we see activity in now these areas that we tend to see in people who are just happier. So by thinking these, sort of compassionate thoughts, you can actually sort of change your brain's sort of natural state over time, right? It's just like going to the gym, nothing happens quickly. And a lot of people, I think, would find, even just seeking therapy to be helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy in particular is a fantastic way of combating stress. Sometimes we think about seeing a therapist or a psychologist as something that we would do if we're depressed or we have something clinically wrong with us. But psychologists are there to help everyday people with everyday problems. And we're everyday people with everyday problems. And when you're feeling a lot of stress in your life, that's the perfect time to go talk to a therapist or talk to a psychologist and, potentially use some of these CBT techniques to learn how to control those runaway thoughts. So those are a few different ways that we could keep going, but you probably know some. The idea is to find something that you're willing and able to do and stick with it. Exercise is actually shown to help with stress too, which is, fantastic.
Yeah, I love the idea that, exercise is a stress, and adding an additional stress such as exercise is, you would think on the surface that it would kind of backfire or cause more trouble, but in actual fact, it seems to make you more resilient. And I guess that just shows how there's different types of stress. So there's kind of like good and bad stress. Is that not necessarily, it's not black and white, but the stress, I guess it exists on a spectrum.
Yeah, some people use the term eustress for good stress. But when we talk about stress, as far as the kind of the stress that we don't want to deal with, these are really perceived threats. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. It's not even the event that matters. We could experience the same event, but if you perceive that to be bad, that's all your brain needs to start having a stress response, right?
Yeah.
But exercise, you go to the gym and you release irisin, exercise hormone, right? BDNF, the cytokine changes that happen with exercise. These are all amazing for your brain, especially BDNF. So you release that specifically when you exercise, and it's associated with all kinds of beneficial outcomes. So exercise is absolutely one of the best things you could do for so it's like if you can just sleep and eat right and exercise, you'll live forever.
Yeah, it's as simple as that, really. Just those three. That's all you need to do. You'll be golden. You'll be good.
Well, I was saying some of my good friends are nutritionists, but I'll die early because I don't want to eat well. I'll exercise and sleep well, but
the nutrition, yeah, the food environment is a whole other podcast that is, oh, it's a minefield, but we'll go one at a time. And yeah, exercise is a game changer, and it can do so much good for you. I just you were talking a little bit there about how you look at a situation. It reminds me of like Viktor Frankl, and he said, when he was in the concentration camps and he was able to like, I think the word is like appraisal, or he was able to look at the situation and derive meaning from it. So yeah, I think it kind of, he was a therapist himself or a psychologist. So it's like, not to say that's what you could achieve with therapy, but something along those lines where you can strengthen your outlook to be able to deal with more challenging situations with more work through something like therapy. I like to promote like mental health and therapy because it's so beneficial.
Yeah, and you're right. Like you'll never be able to control what other people do. What happens to you in the world. That you can control how and what you think, and I think that's much more powerful than people understand.
That's the real power, yeah, to be able to control, I guess, how you think or how you respond to things.
Exactly.
Yeah. So since you like first got into research up till now, have you changed your mind on kind of any of your findings or anything? Have you kind of, I'm sure you have updated like your outlook on things, but is there any kind of key things that you've really been like changing your outlook on or your opinion on?
Well, I think as opposed to my outlook, I've switched research areas a little bit just because, doing more of the human performance. Because that started because I had a student who wanted to look at exercise and brain. And I'm like, well, I have an EEG machine. That's easy, but I don't know anything about exercise other than the fact that I go to the gym. So I don't think that qualifies me. So I called one of my friend Jose that we were talking about, and I was like, hey, you want to collaborate? And so we did that study together, and it was really great finding. We had people run on a treadmill, and we showed that at a very sort of deep level in their brain, level of the amygdala, they had a little bit of protection against sort of negative pictures. And so we were really excited about that. And we found that with our other friend, Corey Peacock, and our other friend, Julius Thomas, who had just retired from the NFL, and he was starting to come back to school. And so this group of us, it just felt like we couldn't stop coming up with experiments. Julius coming from sort of more psychology, me more neuroscience, and then Corey and Jose exercise science. And we ended up doing a bunch of studies right away because so for example, with Corey, I had a couple of papers on what sometimes people talk about as the warrior gene, COMT. And I was talking to him about it, and he said, well, what does it look like in fighters? And I was like, I don't know. He's like, wait, there's something called the warrior gene, and no one's actually looked at this gene in fighters? Because everything that we tend to do on my side is college students, and they study all trained people. So even just the conversations and the vocabulary and trying to understand how we were defining things, cross disciplines was really cool. And so we looked at a bunch of MMA fighters, and we found that they tended to, at a significantly higher level, carry the variant that helps people perform better under stress, which is what sometimes is talked about as the warrior quote unquote variant. So people who have this variant, they have a difference in the way that they clear out dopamine. And so when you put them in a stressful situation, that increase in dopamine that happens with stress kind of puts them in the sweet spot. And I think we had about 50% of MMA fighters had it relative to what we see in all of our other studies, which is about 21% of people. So, like things like that, where you just have these conversations, and so much of that has happened serendipitously. And at the conference, we have neuroscientists coming together, physical therapists coming together with medical doctors and exercise scientists. And it's been pretty amazing to see people who would never have known each other. They're starting to work together, and they're starting to cross fields and really try to understand things better, because in my field, we have a certain way of talking about things and describing things. Exercise science has their own way. And I think when you're willing to sort of get out of that academic silo, it's pretty amazing. The work, I think the work is better when you do that.
Yeah, the collaboration can be amazing. Yeah, like two by two can be, six or whatever, or it can just be much more than what you're doing on your own. So is that ability, that warrior gene, is that like trainable? So let's say, for example, someone doesn't necessarily have the gene. Could they start MMA, and could they become better at handling stress and carry that over to like situations outside of combat sports?
Well, there were certainly plenty of, because only 50% had it. And these were all, UFC, Bellator level. So there were plenty of them, half of them that were doing just fine. So it probably does give them some advantage, but it's only a small change. It's really just the difference in the way you break down dopamine in your prefrontal cortex. Unfortunately, because it's a SNP, it's a polymorphism on the gene. There's nothing you can really do. You were kind of born with that nucleotide. So until, there's this gene editing technology now called CRISPR that's getting better and better. So maybe once you want to start biohacking yourself, you can give yourself all the variants you want. I joked around my class that if that ever happens, I'm going to give myself a myostatin mutation. So I have naturally big muscles. But
oh yeah, like those. What are they? Is it like a Belgian cow or something? And it's like, yeah, it's just grossly oversized.
I'm not above it.
So, yeah, one of your studies, the analysis of the dark triad scores. So what did you? I am the greatest was the title. What did you find in that study? Because the dark triad is kind of like, I guess it's kind of like a pop culture kind of topic almost, but
yeah, it's a little pop culture-y. It's still sexy. So it's like psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. These three personality traits. There was a Russian study that showed that boxers tended to have these traits, but we didn't see it. I mean, there's a cultural difference, but we didn't really see that. And in fact, when we looked at NFL players and we looked at MMA fighters, we're publishing this now, so don't tell anybody. They were fine, emotionally. They think that with the NFL players, a little bit more aggressive and aggression and hostility, but other than that, they were young, all young population, but very healthy overall, cognitively healthy.
Would I be jumping to a conclusion saying here that the brain is plastic and you can kind of train it to be, I guess, good at different things, even though it doesn't have a natural affinity? Maybe it helps to be Machiavellian, but if you are fast or if you are very strategic at a particular sport, you can learn that Machiavellian ability, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think we know. We know that, again, like, some people in the fighters in Russia tend to have that personality trait, but fighters here don't. And it could just be that the way that we train fighters here, the way that the culture is. I don't think anybody really wants to have high psychopathy and narcissism and Machiavellianism. No, so I think overall that's a good thing that we didn't really see those things in those guys.
Yeah, for sure. We don't want to be a bunch of Ted Bundys running around the place. It sounds cool, but in practice, it is very scary. Another study you had then was the state and trait anxiety, and in MMA fighters and its relation to performance. Would you kind of just explain state and trait anxiety and then the results?
I'm going to hold up on those results though, Alex, because we're going to be publishing that really soon. It's actually being written right now. It's a student writing it, so I don't want to give away his give away his show.
It's hard work, no problem at all.
Yeah. So with state and trait anxiety, these are constructs that we look at pretty often. It's just, state is how you feel at that moment, where a lot of us feel different levels of anxiety in the moment than we do normally. And so trait anxiety is sort of normal level of anxiety. And some people are just always a little bit anxious. Where some people, it's just when you get them in that specific situation that they feel anxious.
Right. Okay. So I guess that's kind of back to know thyself and just kind of know your strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. And it's what makes, I think, science sometimes less sexy than gurus online, because, the answer for science is always, it depends. Like that's always our answer, because especially with humans are messy. And, we talked about these polymorphisms. We all come with different flavors of genes, and we all come with different backgrounds and different histories. We're going to biochemically respond to things differently than each other. Based on our history, we're going to behaviorally respond to things different. So there's never like one answer for everybody, unfortunately, but there's general rules of thumb. And I think that those are what we try to prescribe to people. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, general rules of thumb, and take things on an individual basis. And just in terms of like human performance, is there any kind of like daily or weekly practices you would recommend as like general rules of thumb to perform better outside of, sleep and stress management?
Well, it was sleep. It's got to be sleep is the big one. Like you have to sleep, and you can look at the studies. I mean, it's unbelievable if you just give somebody sleep extension, how much improvement you see in their performance. So we want to just like underscore sleep with a Sharpie. And then what we're going to talk about at Neurosports. I should like to mention that the Neurosports conference is going to be January 21st and 22nd on Hollywood Beach, Florida. So if anybody's cold, they should definitely come down and join us. But one of the things that we are going to look at or listen to some talks is, first of all, mindfulness, how much mindfulness can help with sport performance. So there's going to be some data on that, and a really interesting session that I'm curious about on testosterone supplementation, not at sort of what we think about sort of anabolic steroid abuse, but getting what we would consider like a super physiological dose. So people who are a little bit older, maybe men in their 40s, and women, is it a good idea to supplement with TRT testosterone? Not in a way that we would consider to be abuse, but just getting them back to where they were when they were like 30. So I think it's going to be an interesting session. I'm curious about that as well. Why? And I think when you think about it, we don't question women going on hormone replacement therapy when they're of a certain age, but there is kind of this dark cloud around men and testosterone because of the abuse of, I think, anabolic steroids. But we should be able to have that conversation. I think they're going to have that conversation about not thinking about super high levels, non-physiological levels, just like we talk about estrogen replacement therapy. Should we talk about testosterone replacement therapy for men and women, and what would that mean? And they have some data from some studies that they've been doing on that. So I think that's going to be pretty interesting as well. The other thing, obviously, you want to just be safe. One of the things that can impair performance is unfortunately like alcohol. Drinking, just it's kind of its own little topic.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we can't give men, or it's kind of different for men, is because you give us something and we think, oh, more is better, and then we're kind of stupid like that. We take too much and we blows back in our face. Just
like with melatonin, right? If 2 milligrams is good, 20 is even better. And actually, one of my friends, Tony Ritchie, is going to do actually a workshop at the conference, and he does a lot of really cool work. He's cool. He's cool in general, but he has a background in exercise science, and he picked up a doctorate in sports psychology. So he's actually going to talk about some of the work he does using visualization training. He works with a lot of fighters, and I think he tries to activate those mirror neurons during sort of visualization. And so he's going to talk. It's not so much a talk as much as a workshop. So it's going to be an interactive activity where he's going to, I think, give people a demonstration of sort of what he does to improve performance through doing sort of like visualization training.
Yeah, I think mindfulness is like completely underutilized in today's society with, social media really grabbing our attention away from us. And just going back to what I said, I think I feel I like fallacies, and I feel as though I'm using the slippery slope fallacy that if I start using a little bit of this thing, I'll, go downhill with it. But yeah, just going back to the sleep point you made. So if sleep is so beneficial and we extend people's sleep and it produces a huge benefit, why are we not aware of that? So how do we miss the boat on the benefits of sleep when we sleep better? And how do we have almost memory loss when we're sleep deprived and we just don't notice oh, I'm underperforming, or I'm moody or stressed?
I think, well, part of it is that we're just bad at assessing ourselves. We suck at it. If you've ever been in a bar with a drunk friend, you know that they have absolutely no idea how dumb they're behaving. So we're all kind of like that. So if you really want to know about you should ask other people that will be honest with you, because we're just bad. So if we have attentional decrements in performance, we're not going to notice. I think a lot of the research is kind of new, but I do think that I've seen that people in the performance world are more interested in sleep lately. I think it is. And part of it is I talk to one of my friend Julie's have this conversation all the time. And I think part of it is that for so long, especially neuroscientists are just really crappy at communicating information. And it's just, they just live in their own little world, and they talk to each other, and they use kind of their own little specific terminology. And I think we need to do better as scientists, because you can publish all these papers, but if the only people reading them are your friends and colleagues, it's not really helpful for the general population. So I think what we're seeing now are people who are doing better, saying, look, we've extended sleep by an hour and a half, and we got this increase in tennis performance. I mean, there was a paper on tennis, paper on hockey, paper on basketball. They even looked at NBA players that tweet late into the night as an indirect measure of their sleep, and the ones that were tweeting late into the night did awful the next day. So I think that the data are there, and I think people are appreciating it. It's just that I think the onus is on us as scientists to do a better job communicating it in a way that makes sense to everybody, not just to our colleagues.
Yeah, kind of meet people where they're at in the language that they'll understand. And yeah, I think that's a really good point, that we really are just not fully aware of like how we're behaving or our performance. So it's good to review things. And an idea that you're giving me now is I used to track my sleep. I used to, just note it. But I think I'll actually start keeping like a sleep journal, because if sleep is what we spend 30% of our time doing, I'm not going to regret it. Like, it's going to be one of the best investments I can make. And I know it can be better. So that's a really effective approach that I think will really pay off for me. Is there?
I think you're right too. Well, as a quick point, like I'm doing a study right now, and I'm aware of that, but I've been blown away lately because we have people wearing these little sleep watches, but then we also have them filling out a sleep diary. And I can't tell you how many participants have come in and have made comments like that. Like they're suddenly aware of things that they weren't aware of just by tracking their sleep. So if you go to the National Sleep Foundation website, there's plenty of sleep diaries that are freely available to download. And I think 25% of my study subjects have been telling me how eye-opening it's been, and they're seeing things and they're seeing patterns that they otherwise just didn't know existed. And so just being in the study, I think, has helped them because they've kept a sleep journal. So and again, I would Google again. I think National Sleep Foundation has one that's pretty good. National Institutes of Health has one, so people can just download them and track their sleep, just like you said.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll attach that in the show notes. So I'm aware that we're kind of like tight for time. So Jaime, do you have anything that you'd like to mention that we didn't go over? You have the conference coming up. Is there anything else you want to speak about that we didn't go over?
I don't think so. I would love to, again, have people come to the conference. They can find us at neurosports.net. We're on Instagram at Society for Neurosports. Come hang out with us, meet all the cool kids, and share ideas.
Yeah, learn about how to sleep better, have less stress, exercise better, all that good stuff. So yeah,
all that good stuff.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, Jaime, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for having me.